In a world of perfect illusions, we search for the glitches that reveal the hidden truth behind the mask. Witness the raw, unfiltered moments where reality breaks and the real story begins to emerge. Subscribe today and help us uncover the secrets within the digital shadows.
Notification came through at 11:47 on a Tuesday night. I know the exact time because I was still at my desk, cross-referencing a stack of escrow documents for a client whose closing had been pushed 3 times already. I had a lukewarm cup of tea going cold beside my keyboard and a spreadsheet open that I had been staring at for 2 hours. My phone lit up. A motion alert from the security camera I had installed at my grandmother's house 6 months ago. My grandmother had passed in March. She left the house to me. I set down my pen and tapped the notification. My mother was standing in the front hallway, holding a glass of red wine, laughing at something my uncle was saying. My brother was behind her, carrying a folding table through the front door. Someone had strung lights along the porch railing. Someone had parked 4 cars in the driveway. I sat back in my chair. I had not been invited to whatever this was. I had not been told there would be a whatever this was. I had changed the locks 2 weeks ago when I found out my mother had kept a spare key from the estate process. I had done it quietly, without confrontation, because I was not ready for that conversation yet. I had assumed the new lock would be the end of it. What I was watching on my phone told me she had gotten a locksmith to let her in anyway. I did not call her that night. I did not text. I put my phone face down on the desk, and I sat there for a long time looking at the wall. I am a paralegal. I have worked in real estate law for 7 years. I know exactly what that footage meant, legally. I also know that the moment I picked up that phone and started yelling, I would lose every advantage I had. So I didn't. I opened a new document and I started writing down the time, the date, and what I had seen. The house on Birchwood Lane had belonged to my grandmother, Eloise, for 41 years. She raised my mother there. She raised me there too, in a way, because my mother was not always around to do it herself. Some of my earliest memories are of that kitchen. The yellow walls, the way the afternoon light came through the window over the sink and made everything look golden. My grandmother taught me to make pie crust in that kitchen. She let me sleep in the big bed when I had bad dreams. She called me her little shadow because I followed her everywhere. My mother called it a burden. The taxes, the upkeep, the way the gutters needed cleaning every fall. She said it constantly for years, usually right before asking my grandmother to take out a line of credit on it for one reason or another. My grandmother said no, every single time. When Eloise was diagnosed, she called me first. Not my mother, not my uncle. Me. We sat at that kitchen table, and she told me she had updated her will. She told me the house was mine. She said she knew I would take care of it. She said she was sorry she could not do more. I told her the house was more than enough. She passed 7 months after the diagnosis. The will was clear. The estate attorney was straightforward about it. The deed transferred to my name without complication because there was nothing to complicate. I was the sole beneficiary of the property. My mother received some jewelry and a small cash amount that my grandmother had set aside years before. My uncle received the same. My mother did not take it well. She did not yell at the reading. She didn't make a scene. She smiled the way she always smiles when she is calculating something. That tight, patient smile that means she has already decided what she is going to do and she is just waiting for the right moment to do it. She hugged me afterward. She told me she was proud of me for being so responsible. I should have known then. The first thing she asked, 2 weeks after the funeral, was whether I planned to rent the house or sell it. I told her I wasn't doing either. I was going to live in it eventually, once I finished saving enough to handle the renovation it needed. In the meantime, I was keeping it maintained and insured, and that was my business. She nodded. She said that made sense. She said she just wanted to make sure I had thought it through. Over the following months, she started showing up at the house. Not to ask, just to arrive. She would call me afterward to tell me she had stopped by to check on things, to water the plants, to make sure the pipes hadn't frozen. She always had a reason. The reasons always sounded reasonable. I was 2 hours away and I couldn't be there every week, so part of me was grateful. Part of me was not paying close enough attention. The camera I installed in October was not the first sign something was wrong. The first sign was the utility bill. I had the gas and electric in my name. I paid them automatically. In September, my electric bill was almost 3 times what it had been in August. I called the utility company. They said usage had spiked significantly. I asked if there had been a meter issue. They said no. I drove out that weekend. The house looked fine from the outside. But inside, there were things that were not mine. A throw blanket on the couch that I had never seen before. A coffee mug on the drying rack. 2 cans of soup in the pantry that I did not buy. I stood in the kitchen for a long time trying to decide if I was imagining things. I was not imagining things. Someone had been staying there. I bought the camera on the drive home. What I saw over the following 6 weeks would have made a lesser person snap. My mother had been treating the house like her own private guest cottage. She had been letting my brother stay there rent-free. She had been hosting her book club there twice a month. She had left a key with a neighbor and told the neighbor she was the property manager. When I changed the locks, I thought it would be the end of it. I did not account for how bold she had become. The night of the party, the camera caught 17 people coming through that front door over the course of 3 hours. My brother carried in a folding table and 6 chairs. My aunt brought a casserole dish. Someone connected a Bluetooth speaker to the outlet in the living room and played music until after midnight. My mother opened a bottle from the wine rack in the dining room. My grandmother's wine rack. My wine rack. She opened it and poured for her guests without hesitating for even a second. I watched all of it from my apartment. I did not sleep. In the morning, I called my attorney. I had worked alongside estate and property attorneys for 7 years. I knew how the law read. I knew what trespassing meant, what unlawful entry meant, what the difference between a civil nuisance and a criminal matter looked like on paper. I also knew that a judge would not care about my feelings. A judge would care about documentation. My attorney's name is Fiona. She has been practicing property law for 22 years, and she has approximately 0 patience for families who treat inheritances like shared assets. She listened to everything I told her. She asked me how long I had been documenting. I told her 6 weeks of camera footage, detailed logs, timestamped screenshots, and a spreadsheet tracking every instance of unauthorized entry I could confirm. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Good. Don't touch anything yet. Let me make some calls." Here's what Fiona found when she started pulling records. My brother had filed a change of address with the post office 8 weeks after my grandmother died. His new address was Birchwood Lane. He had used that address to apply for a renter's assistance program through the state. He was collecting a monthly housing subsidy as a low-income tenant. The landlord listed on his application was my mother. My mother, who did not own the house, she had signed the application as the property owner. She had provided a lease agreement as documentation, a lease agreement between herself and my brother for a property that belonged to me for a rental amount that she was collecting and depositing into an account I knew nothing about. When Fiona told me, I sat in her office very still for about 30 seconds. Then I said, "How much?" Fiona set the paper on the desk and pushed it toward me. 9 months of payments, $1,150 a month. I looked at the number. I looked up at Fiona. She had also, Fiona continued, applied for a property tax exemption on Birchwood Lane using a caregiver provision that did not apply to her situation in any way. The exemption had been processing for 2 months. If it had gone through, it would have triggered a review of the ownership records, which could have complicated my clear title in ways that would take years to untangle. I thought about my grandmother at that kitchen table, the yellow walls, the way she said she was sorry she couldn't do more. I thought about my mother's smile at the reading of the will. I took a breath. I asked Fiona what we were going to do. She told me. We gave it 3 more weeks, 3 weeks of documented entries, documented utility, usage, documented proof of habitation. I kept every notification from the camera. I logged every vehicle in the driveway with timestamps and license plates. I was not angry anymore by the end of those 3 weeks. I was past anger. I was somewhere quieter and colder. The place you get to when something has been going on long enough that the emotion burns out and what is left is just clarity. On a Saturday in late November, my mother texted me to say she was having some people over at the house for an early holiday gathering, and she wanted to know if I would like to come. At the house, not her house. Not, she was hosting at a location, at the house. As if Birchwood Lane was a neutral place that belonged to the idea of our family rather than to me, specifically, by deed. I texted back, "Sure, I'll be there." She sent me a heart emoji. I left my apartment at noon. I stopped at the county recorder's office and picked up 2 certified copies of the deed. I had already printed and organized the documentation binder the night before. It was in a canvas tote bag on my passenger seat, 37 pages, tabbed. The camera footage was on a thumb drive clipped to the front cover. Fiona had a copy of everything. The county housing authority had received an anonymous tip about a potentially fraudulent renter's assistance claim 2 days earlier. I also called the non-emergency police line that morning and let them know I was the owner of a property where I had documented evidence of ongoing trespass and that I would be going to the property that afternoon to request the occupant's leave, and that I wanted it on record in case I needed assistance. The dispatcher was professional. She noted the call. She said if I needed officers to respond, I could call back. I drove the 2 hours with the radio off. I thought about my grandmother the whole way. I thought about the soup cans in the pantry, the coffee mug on the drying rack, the moment I stood in that kitchen and felt like something had been violated in a way I couldn't yet name. My grandmother had trusted me with that house. She had chosen me specifically, deliberately, because she knew I would protect it, and I had let it go on for months because I kept telling myself it was manageable, it was family, it was not worth the damage a confrontation would do. But the subsidy fraud was not a family disagreement. The forged lease was not a misunderstanding. My mother had looked at something that was not hers and decided it was, and she had built an entire paper structure to support that decision, and she had done it without blinking. The damage was already done. The only question now was whether I was going to let it keep going. I pulled onto Birchwood Lane at 2:15. There were 6 cars in the driveway and along the curb. I could see through the front window that the lights were on and people were moving inside. Someone had put a wreath on the door, my grandmother's front door, a wreath they had bought and hung on a house they didn't own. I sat in my car for 4 minutes. Then I got out. My mother opened the door before I even knocked. She was in a green blouse and her good earrings, the one she wore when she wanted to signal that an occasion mattered. She pulled me into a hug that smelled like her perfume and the candle she always bought at Christmas. She was genuinely happy to see me. That was the part that still gets me even now. She was not performing. She was actually glad I had come, because in whatever version of reality she had built in her head, this was fine. All of this was fine. She had simply expanded the definition of hers until it included everything that had been mine. There were 11 people in the living room. My aunt was there. My uncle. My brother, who had been living in my house for 9 months on fraudulent housing assistance, was eating a cheese plate in the corner like he did not have a single thing to be concerned about. I said hello to everyone. I accepted a glass of sparkling water from my aunt. I stood by the fireplace and I looked around the room at the yellow walls, the furniture that had been rearranged slightly since the last time I had been there, the wreath on the door visible through the side light, and I felt very calm. My mother came to stand beside me. She put her hand on my arm. She said, "Isn't it nice, all of us together here?" She said, "Grammy would have loved this." I said, "I need to talk to you about the house." Her hand stiffened slightly on my arm, just slightly, then she relaxed. She said, "Oh, honey, let's not do that today. It's a holiday party." I said, "I know. I'm sorry, but I need to do this now." I raised my voice just enough to be heard over the music. I said, "I need everyone to know that this property belongs to me. I have the deed. I am the sole owner of record. I did not authorize this gathering, and I did not authorize anyone to be living here. I am asking everyone who is not me to leave." The music kept playing for a second. Then someone turned it off. My mother laughed. It was the laugh she uses when she thinks you have said something embarrassing, and she is going to help you walk it back. She looked at the room and then back at me and she said, "Hannah, sweetheart, no one is questioning your ownership." I said, "You signed a lease agreement presenting yourself as the owner of this property. You collected 9 months of rental payments on a housing assistance program in my brother's name for a property you don't own. That is fraud." The room was very quiet. My uncle started to say something. My brother put down his cheese plate. My mother's expression shifted. The laugh faded. What replaced it was not guilt, it was strategy. She turned to the room and said, "She has been under a lot of stress." She turned back to me and lowered her voice. "This is not the place for this." I opened the canvas tote bag. I set the certified deed on the coffee table. I set the printed documentation on top of it. I said, "I've already reported the fraudulent housing claim to the county authority, I've already spoken to an attorney, and I've already called the non-emergency police line to document that I am here today to reclaim access to my property." My brother stood up. He said, "You called the cops on your own family?" I said, "I called to document that I'm the owner, asking unauthorized occupants to leave. Whether that becomes a police matter is up to you." My mother turned to my aunt. She said, "You see what I mean? She has been like this since the estate was settled. She can't handle the responsibility." She looked back at me and her voice got soft and sad, the voice she uses when she wants a room to feel sorry for her. "I'm trying to help you, sweetheart. I was managing the property because you weren't here to do it." I said, "You were collecting rent on it." She said, "I was covering maintenance costs." I said, "You collected $10,350. I have the bank records." The room shifted again. My aunt looked at my mother. My uncle looked at the floor. My brother's face went through several things very quickly. My mother said, "That money went right back into the house." I said, "Then you'll be able to show receipts. My attorney will be in touch." She tried 3 more angles after that. She tried the grief angle, saying we were both still processing losing Grammy and this was grief talking. She tried the family angle, saying I was destroying us over a misunderstanding that could be handled privately. She tried the stability angle, the one she always saved for last, suggesting quietly to the room that I had always struggled with anxiety and big decisions and that she was worried about me. I had expected all 3. I had written them down in advance, actually, in the notes I kept during those 3 weeks of waiting. I knew the order she would use them in. I knew because she had used them my entire life whenever I did something she hadn't approved, whenever I do a boundary she hadn't authorized. I said, "I'm not having a breakdown. I'm exercising my property rights, and I need everyone to leave now, please." There was a long moment. Then my uncle picked up his coat. Once he moved, others followed. My aunt, 2 of my mother's friends whose names I didn't know. My brother last, who looked at me as he passed and said, "You're making a huge mistake." I said, "The lease you used for the housing application was signed by someone who didn't own the property. That's the mistake that was made." He didn't say anything else. My mother was the last one in the room. She stood by the fireplace in her green blouse and her good earrings, and she looked at me with an expression I had not seen before. Not the strategy face, not the grief face. Something underneath all of that. Something that knew. She said, "Your grandmother always did favor you." I said, "She trusted me to take care of her home. I'm doing that." My mother picked up her coat from the chair. She walked to the front door. She stopped with her hand on the knob and she said, "I hope you know what you've done to this family." I said, "I hope you kept the receipts." She left. I stood in the living room of my grandmother's house for a long time after the last car pulled away. The lights were still on. The music was off. Someone had left a plate of cookies on the counter and a half-empty bottle of wine on the coffee table beside my grandmother's wine rack. The wreath was still on the door. I took the wreath down. I put it in the recycling bin. I went back inside and I sat at the kitchen table, the same table where my grandmother had told me the house was mine, where she had taught me to make pie crust, where the afternoon light came through the window and made everything look golden even in November. I sat there and I was quiet for a while. My phone buzzed. It was Fiona. She had gotten a call from the county housing authority. They had flagged the assistance file for review after the tip. They were opening a formal investigation. She wanted me to know before I heard from anyone else. I set the phone down on the table. The housing fraud case took 4 months to resolve. My brother repaid the assistance amount in full as part of a civil settlement that also included my attorney's fees. The fraudulent lease was formally invalidated. The property tax exemption application was withdrawn before it could do any damage to my title. My mother did not speak to me for 6 weeks. When she finally called, she did not apologize. She said she wanted us to find a way forward. I told her I was open to that eventually and that I would let her know when I was ready. I have not yet let her know. The house on Birchwood Lane got its renovation this past spring. I hired a contractor who found the kitchen walls were in better shape than they looked. The yellow stayed. I asked specifically for the yellow to stay. I sleep well there. I sleep the way I used to sleep as a kid, when bad dreams would come and I would walk down the hall and my grandmother would be there, and everything in that house felt solid and certain and mine. It still does. People ask me sometimes if I regret how it ended. Not the legal outcome. They usually mean the family part. They mean my mother standing at the front door in her green blouse, hand on the knob saying, "I hope you know what you've done to this family." They want to know if that hurt. It did. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. But here is what I've come to understand in the months since. The damage to the family was not done on the day I set the deed on the coffee table. It was done the morning my mother signed a lease on a property she didn't own. It was done every month she deposited that assistance money. It was done the day she handed a neighbor a spare key and told her she was the property manager. Actions have a shape. They cast a shadow forward in time. Whatever fell apart between us fell apart because of what she chose to do, not because of what I chose to document. That distinction matters to me. It took a while before it did, but it matters now. I think about my grandmother Eloise a lot when I'm in that house. Not in a heavy way, just in the ordinary way you think about someone who shaped you. She was not a complicated person. She was careful and she was consistent and she kept her word. She told me the house was mine and she made it legal and she trusted me to handle it. That is a straightforward thing. The complication came from other people deciding that her intention didn't count, that the paper she signed was just a suggestion, that love could be converted into entitlement if you were patient and bold enough about it. What I learned, sitting at that kitchen table in November, with the lights still on and the music off, is that protecting something you've been trusted with is not aggression, it is not cruelty, it is not the act of someone who has lost perspective. It is the most basic form of respect. Respect for the person who trusted you, respect for the process they went through to make their wishes clear, respect for yourself as someone whose name on a document actually means something. My mother is smart. She knew exactly what she was doing. And I think that is the part that took the longest to sit with. Not the fraud, not the money, but the intelligence it required. She did not stumble into this accidentally. She made choices, one after another, and each one required her to look at what was right and decide to do the other thing anyway. That is not grief talking. That is not family dysfunction. That is a decision. I made decisions too. I decided to document instead of confront. I decided to wait until the case was solid instead of moving when I was angry. I decided to walk into that room calmly and set paper on a table instead of raising my voice. None of that came naturally. It came from 7 years of watching what holds up in a legal dispute and what doesn't. It came from Fiona telling me don't touch anything yet. It came from the part of me that knew, even at 11:47 on a Tuesday night watching that camera feed, that the only way through this was going to be precision. Elores used to say that a quiet person in the right room is more powerful than a loud person in the wrong one. I don't think she meant it legally, but it applied. The house on Birchwood Lane kept the yellow walls. It still gets that afternoon light through the kitchen window. I still sleep well there. Some things, if you protect them carefully enough, stay exactly as they were meant to be.